Greetings and welcome to Teaching Tips and Thoughts. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my use of checklists in Brightspace and how I use those to help improve the student experience and serve essentially as a reminder for the students. So just as a quick look here before we take a look at them in my class, let's look at what are the checklists. Well, they're a way of keeping the students on track. They're reminders of what is due every single week. Now, it doesn't just have to be assignments, but it can be the reminders of assignments and due dates. But it can also be other things, not specifically graded assignments, such as, say, discussions, but also other things such as readings or lectures to watch or reminders of assignments that are coming up in a few weeks that they should be working on. So I have all these different reminders in each checklist and I subdivide them into sections. So there's a checklist part for the lecture materials, there's part for the assignments, and there's parts that are just reminders. So they have to check these off. They're the reminder for the students, which is one of the reasons I use them. And I actually require them to be completed to move on to the next lesson in my classes. Now let's take a quick look at these in my class. So if we take a look at them in the class, how I have them set up, if we go into my content here, and let's take a quick look at, say, the second lesson in the class. So lesson 2, when I open it up, has a couple of things here. And what it has is a reminder here. It's just a little bit of information about the lesson. But then there's a link to the lesson 1 checklist. And in order to access lesson 2, they have to have completed the lesson 1 checklist. So there's a lesson 1 checklist at the end of lesson 1, but this also serves as a reminder for them. So they're not able to access. And in fact, these 3 modules are all hidden. So they have release conditions tied into them that say the student has to have completed the lesson 1 checklist. If they don't complete the checklist, they'll just see this first portion. They won't see the subfolders, which says it's a reminder here that, hey, you have to complete your checklist in order to move on. And then at the end of that, there is the lesson 2 checklist, which has all the materials that you would need when completing the second lesson. So that's one of the ways I keep them on track, is requiring them to use them. But if we want to actually take a look at one of these checklists, and here we can open one up, what I do is I subdivide them. So this is the lesson 2 checklist, and I break it into 3 sections. As I mentioned, there are the lecture materials, the graded assignments. In this case, there's extra credit opportunities if there happen to be any, and specific reminders. So normally 3, this one happens to have 4 that are possibilities here. So lecture materials would be what we're reading and what videos they should be watching. So those are linked to there. Anything that receives a grade, that is required to be done for a grade, would be here. So in this case, it has 2 parts for the discussion, their initial post and their responses, and a lab that they have to do. An extra credit opportunity on commenting on a specific image that I use for that week. And then reminders, and that we have 2 different semester observations. And in this case, I remind them to make their solar observations, and that their moon and constellation observations is first due in lesson 4. So because some of my things require clear weather, they don't want to be waiting necessarily until that lesson to try to complete it, because you might get a nice rainy week and that makes it difficult to get their observations. So I give them over several weeks, and I put this reminder in each week. But then once the student has marked all these off, then that will activate the release conditions, and the student could then move on to the next lesson. So if they go back to content again, once they've actually completed that lesson, the checklist, then all the materials will be visible. So that lesson 2 checklist would then be what is linked into these other ones. And as I set up here, release conditions, if we want to take a look at the release conditions there, the release condition is that in order to see the lecture materials for lesson 3, they had to have completed the lesson 2 checklist. So I found that it helps keep the students on track in terms of knowing exactly what they should have done each week. So I don't have to get the questions. Well, was there anything else due? If it wasn't in the checklist, then you didn't have anything else due. If you went through the checklist and marked off everything, then you're good for that lesson and ready to move on to the next lesson. So that concludes this discussion on how I use checklists in my classes. I'll be back again next time for another teaching tip and thought. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.